Hey, church family and others out there. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight as we're kind of wrapping up the 5-week Town Talk conversations we've been having around race and racism. And we've had some amazing, really good discussions. We've kind of defined some terms and heard some stories and talked to some different age groups and then looked at it from a biblical theological perspective last week. And so this week, a number of you have emailed in questions, and Josie Villa will be hosting and moderating it. Those questions will be read anonymously, and I'm the only one who's known who sent those in. And obviously, there's going to be a few more pointed questions, and so we're excited to talk about that and to address it, because really at the heart of all this, right? I mean, I deeply believe that each and every one of us want to honor God and love Him and honor each other and love each other. And we're trying to figure out what the best way to do that is, and maybe where we've missed some stuff. And so really that's the heart of the conversation. I think, well, as all of you on the panel know, there's a tendency to push people into, oh, those are the bad people, or those are the people who want to just bring reform, or those are the people who just don't care. And I don't think that's true for the vast majority of people. And so hopefully tonight we can start addressing some of those things a little more. We'll talk more at the end about what's coming up next week, but for now I'll turn it over to Josie, and you can get us started.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Trevor. First, I want to thank certainly our church leaders, Pastor Brian and Pastor Trevor. Thank you so much for providing this platform for our church to really begin to have these kinds of very difficult discussions. And it's really important that we do have these discussions, because it does help to create greater understanding. And we come to these with only good intent, right? And we know that the questions that were being presented tonight are done in the same vein, that they're all with good intent to really learn more. And so I want to thank everybody who took the opportunity to provide those thoughtful questions. I do want to say we're not here to give answers, but we really are here to share our perspectives, right? So we don't profess to be the experts in these areas, but we do want to be able to just give our own perspective based on the type of questions that you've asked. So we just want to make that clarification. And certainly, DeLeon and Wayne have certainly been a part of these discussions in the past. And I want to thank Ubi and Avante for joining us tonight to continue in this conversation. So I'm going to get us started with this question. Are actual or perceived racial injustices being used as excuses to change the culture? So I'll go ahead and just, using my little panel here, I'll just ask someone to go first. And if you want to pass, it's totally okay. And then if you want me to come back, we can certainly come back. So again, the question: are actual or perceived racial injustices being used as excuses to change the culture? So Wayne, I'm going to start with you. Thank you.
Well, it's interesting how they phrase the question, actually being used. Now, when you think of the culture, and I do believe that underneath it all, there is a desire to change our American culture, to be more accepting. And if you talk about being used, I don't think it was so much being used as it has come out as a almost natural reaction to what they saw with George Floyd and many others. And it has built up a swell of emotions that have culminated into a racial injustice. So that's why I say it's kind of interesting how the person phrased it. Now, that's my personal reaction to it, is that it's not so much that it's being used, it's just that, yes, a cultural change And I'm not a literary expert, but culture, meaning something that's what we all live within, there is some request for change. That is definitely what a lot of people are wanting. They want to see change in our culture when it comes to race and it comes to our interactions with one another.
Okay. How about Avante? You go next.
That's an interesting question, because I think that there's no way that the culture could stay the same after something like this. And but I do think that we have a huge advantage as Christians, because God gives us a discerning spirit. And so he will help us to navigate what changes are being made, and helping us then also to be consistent with our faith background. And so that's I think there's a huge advantage in being a believer during all of this, because we do get the benefit of the one who absolutely has no agenda, which is God. He has his own agenda. And so we get to stick to that. I do think that there are times where people try to take advantage of things, and there is some manipulation that can occur, and we have to be careful with that. But I just don't think that it's realistic that the culture can stay the same after this has happened. And there are going to be some changes that we like, and there's going to be some that are going to be harder for us to accept. But again, if we can kind of stick to the foundation of our faith, I think we're going to make it through okay. And that's where we just have a huge advantage over people who are trying to navigate this all on their own without the wisdom that God gives.
Yeah, thank you. How about DeLeon? Are actual or perceived racial injustices being used as excuses to change the culture?
I look at it as, similar to what Wayne and Avante said. We absolutely, any injustice, we need a change. We need a change to happen. But for me, it speaks more to a trauma response, a hurt response, a fear response, that when people are feeling these things or seeing these things, and you reflect on your life experiences, you reflect on your family experiences, it becomes very real and very apparent that something has to change. I can't sit back and my family is impacted, which any of us could identify. I can't sit back and my kids are impacted by these things and be silenced in the midst of that. So to me, it speaks more to the hurt, the fear, the trauma that folks are experiencing when they see something like that, when they hear of things like that, and it hits so close to home and it happens so frequently. So I think it's more than just being used. I wouldn't use those words. I think it's really real hurt, real intense pain that people are feeling, and then they're reacting and responding to in the moment.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Ubi, how about you?
You're muted. Yeah.
Mute myself. So that's been an interesting, I'm just hearing the questions for the first time. So I'm thinking it through. But what I'm seeing is I'm married to a Caucasian gentleman, right? And so I'm in that world a lot, right? And I sense folks feeling like they're losing their control, in a sense, that things are not going to be the same if we go too far to changing things, right? Because we like things that are comfortable and are safe and that we know, and the house and the 2 cars and the 2.5 kids and the dog, and walking in the neighborhood and not being afraid. But we are our brother's keepers. And so when my brother, especially if we call ourselves Christians, right? If my brother's hurting, no matter what color my brother is or my sister is, it should hurt me. And it should move me to action. It should move me to get engaged in understanding, even, or trying to put myself in their shoes, be empathetic somewhere, somehow. So I'm seeing the fear factor of, oh my gosh, it's not the quiet neighborhood, and the people that move next door, they're different than me, but can we, how do we coexist if they are not like me, and not necessarily just in how they look, but in the things that they do, and the things that the loud music, the oompa oompa, and all of that. So there's a lot shifting, and it should shift, and it should change, because the first one to change things was Jesus. He didn't come to pacify the Pharisees and the Sadducees. He shifted things. And so as Christians, we need to be ready to shift and to change and to move. And that's painful. That can be painful for some people.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Thank you. So my own thought about this, and it might not answer the question, but it's certainly something I've given a lot of thought about what makes this time different than previous times, because this isn't the first time, right, that we've seen these kinds of things happen. But what makes this different? And for me, I think about the world that we live in right now, and the access to technology that our this generation, the youngest generation has. They were born with this technology, and have it available 24/7. They are I believe, they are much more culturally aware than past generations have been, because of their access to so many different cultures and so many different, bits of information, and they're learning at a rate that's just incredible. And so I think that, part of what's different is that we have a generation that is very aware and feel. I think, and again, I'm speaking about just even having conversations with my own kids about their friends. I mean, they view friends as being people that they connect with on the internet, that they engage with around the world, right? So of many different nationalities and countries. And so, when I think about what might be different and especially, excuses to cultural change, I view this as this generation is just very aware. And I think it's more personal because of that awareness. Okay, so let's go to our next question. So the next question is, does the examples being played out in the riots really reflect racial tensions, or do they represent cultural shifts in perceived class structures? So I think I'm going to start with De Leon. Do you want to try and grab that one?
I think it's a combination of everything. But it is, when you see an example like this with George Floyd, in my mind, I just reflected back to Emmett Till, and reading up and doing my own research. His mom decided to have an open casket. And what that did was spark a movement across the nation, because one reporter was able to get that on the front page. And because the scenes were so graphic, because it was so horrific to not only people of African-American descent, but all people, that it caused the movement. And I think when someone sees the nature in which a human being suffers in that way, it causes a reaction. I think it's, whether it's racial tensions, and it's also, hey, we got to move to a different culture of how we're doing things in this country, because we cannot stay the same and have things like this. No child should see that. No one should be a part of that. So I think it speaks to, complex things that are going on, but certainly there are some racial tensions in the background or in the foundation of that it sparked, particularly for people who looking at it and reflecting, your nieces and nephew, your family members, it scares you. Mm-hmm. So it's a very complex thing to be able to really grab a hold to. But I think it definitely stems from that. And also let's continue to make some shifts in how we do things, our traditions, our culture here in America. So
Great, thank you. Ubi, can I ask you to go next?
Can you read the question again?
Absolutely, yes. Does the examples being played out in the riots really reflect racial tensions, or do they represent cultural shifts in perceived class structures?
I've done some thinking, in regards to those of us that are Christians, right? And I say that, like, this country was founded on Christian principles, and these men that wrote the Constitution were Christian men, but I still struggle personally with owning people. They, at that time, they owned people, and I still have a hard time personally. That just doesn't go together, and it's almost. I'm originally from Texas, and in the South, I went a few weeks ago, and it's still very much, the N-word is still heard a lot over there. And I still don't understand, because it comes sometimes from Christian people. And so why are we still there, even as Christian people, right? So I don't have the answer. I'm still trying to sort it out in my head, how those two even, how that even meshes, and how we still have, like they say on TV, Sunday morning is the most racially divided morning of the week, So why are we still there? And are these younger generation, is all of this that's happening now because we're wanting to change culture Christian, or culture, or are we using all of our pains, or to try to get a point across? But my brothers were racially, and still are racially profiled, and they're Latinos, right? So how do we make sense of all of this?
Okay, thank you. Avante, maybe I'll ask you to go next. Would you like me to read the question?
No, I think I'm okay.
Okay.
That's the benefit of going third. I do think that the riots, I'm speaking about the riots, not the protests. I'm segregating those in my mind. So when I think about the riots, I do think that they include more than just racial tension. I think there is more going on with that. When I hear about some of the things that are happening in the midst of the riots, I have a hard time reconciling what it has to do with George Floyd. Like some of the things I've heard about what's happening in Portland. So I do think that there's more involved, and it kind of goes back to what I said before, that we have to be so wise about how we navigate this time so that we can really understand what's at play. But I also think that one thing we have to learn, or that I've come to understand as I thought about the talk tonight, there is a difference between being multicultural and having multiple complexions. So when, like if you look into an audience, and there are churches that are there in some ways they're very segregated, but you usually see a little bit of mixing in a church congregation, as an example. And just because you see, like, if it's a predominantly Black church and you see a few white faces, that doesn't mean it's a multicultural church. There are people there with different skin tones, but are those cultures really reflected and integrated into the church? Same thing if it's a predominantly white church and then you have some Latino people and you have some Black people there. Is it really multicultural? There's a church in Kirkland that intentionally set out to be multicultural, and they talk about the importance of cross-cultural ministry and the intentionality with which they bring all the various worship styles and the different, they bring it all together. And I don't think that our culture always does that. We have lots of complexions, but we don't always blend our cultures together. I think, I think about food. We do really well with food. Like 1 week, you can have Thai, you can have Filipino, you can have Mexican, you can have American, you can do that. But we don't do the same thing in other aspects of our culture. So I think there is a lot that's playing out in those riots, and I hope they calm down so that we can have some productive conversations and really work through some of these issues. But I do think that there's more at play, and but we want to bring out of that the best, so that we come out of it better, stronger, and not just more divided.
Great, thank you. I also agree. I don't think it's an either or, right? I think that it's very complex.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot packed into what's happening right now.
Yes.
And I think that, when we can have these conversations and try and develop an understanding, that's where we'll really be able to figure out what is going on. But I don't think it's an either or. I think it's very complex.
And then also thinking about this is all happening in the midst of the coronavirus health crisis and the economic shutdown. And there's a lot going on. 2020 has been a trip, So there is a whole lot going on. So there is no, I agree, Josie, it's not either or. It's both.
For sure. All right, great. How about you, Wayne?
I'll just make mine really quick. I separate the protest and the riots. And when people talk to me and their first thing out of their mouth is they want to talk about the people, breaking windows and all that kind of stuff. I said, forget that. That's a very small portion of it. I don't care what news or thing you're reading. Let's remember that what started this is why it culminated on the phrase Black Lives Matter. And let's talk about that. It is something about the race of the individual who you watch die in real life. And then it brought us to think about all the other Black individuals, men that were killed in the hands of police. So, and in that case, it's about race. Okay. I think one of the weeks someone said, well, what about all lives matter? And I think I used the analogy because I saw it somewhere else, that, well, if you take the COVID situation right now, there's a lot of diseases, aren't there, out there? There's cancer, there's diabetes, there's heart disease, there's the COVID disease, there's a seasonal flu. But at this point in time in our society, in our world, what's the most important disease that we need to pay attention to? It's COVID. And in the case of Black Lives Matter, yes, all lives matter, but right now, let's pay attention to some of the Black lives that really matter. So we have to help people out. Don't let them go astray into the small pieces and the things that really shouldn't be paying attention to. Let's stay focused on the Black Lives Matter issue.
Good, thank you. Okay, I'm going to shift gears and pick another question. I think this is a really interesting one. So apparently the US is one of the most popular places to come in the world. Why? Does this mean the value of living here is more impactful than racism? But that was a very interesting question.
Yeah.
Let's see, Ubi, I think I'll let you go first if you're prepared. You're muted.
That is a deep question, and just hearing it for the first time, I'm not really sure. I mean, why is everybody breaking the doors down to get here? And yet there's so much that's broken here. I'm not quite sure. So I'm going to pass for a second.
Okay, very good. All right, let's see. How about DeLeon?
Josie, as I reflect on the question, it kind of makes me think. I haven't lived outside of the U.S., but in my research, going back in history, I know that we are not without our hands in different areas of country affairs, wars, challenges, and other places as well. So although this is a place that people come to, it also has been a place where we have had some, had some issues and some challenges in other countries' economic downfall, in their military downfall. And I think that sometimes plays into, hey, economic disparity in other places, folks wanting to see, hearing about the American dream, which doesn't discredit that we are working towards, I think, bringing a change and a cultural change. I think you can have one, but they don't have to be mutually exclusive, meaning that we can be working towards this dream or this thought that everybody can achieve, and be behind and acknowledging some of our own evils and some of our own impurities. And I believe they both exist and they're both very real. So it doesn't mean that, hey, this is a place where technology and growth and everything has happened. And it also has been built on the backs of impurity and slavery and this disparity and amongst other groups. And so I think you don't, I guess a viewpoint, we don't get to exclude both one or the other. It can be a place that has grown, and we've had some technologically advanced situations, and we've had a multitude of people build what America is right now. And it's very much so some evils that we haven't acknowledged yet, that we have to be able to move forward and heal, because that's the ultimate goal for us, to come together and be able to heal from that. And I think just skipping over it and acting like it doesn't exist, or perceiving that people still want to come here, so that's not a problem here, we're not quite seeing the comprehensive view of everything that's going on. And the encouragement would be for each one of us to go and really explore history and really see some of those things and why other people may have had challenges in their area and may be seeking to come to America at this time. So.
Okay, all right. How about Avante? You want to go next?
I like to listen to this podcast, and the lady in the podcast, she always uses this phrase, which I've come to adopt as my own. And she will say, 2 things can be true. 2 different things can be true. And so like Deleon was saying, it can be true that there's a lot of appeal in coming to America, at the same time that there's some challenges that we need to overcome. I had the chance to travel to Europe for the first time before all the craziness happened. And when I was in Paris, I was walking around and I was thinking, Paris is kind of like New York City with a French accent. There's so many similarities in different things. And I said that to someone that we met, that was from New York City, and she was so offended. She was so offended that I compared her New York to Paris. It was crazy. But the world has shrunk so much. And so people do have this ability to move around. And so what I really think is, for me personally, I love America. I love the country. I know we got problems, but it's just like your family. You love your family and you got issues, but sometimes they're huge issues you got to work out. Sometimes they're smaller things, but I love it. The other thing I wanted to read is a quote. I saw this quote from Oprah and I really liked it. She said, after the hundreds of stories I've heard of atrocities around the globe, I know that if you're a woman born in the United States, you're one of the luckiest women in the world. And I really do think there's a lot of good that we offer. And that is what attracts people here. And again, 2 things can be true. We still got work to do.
Okay. Wayne, you're next.
So real quick, I have a science background. And so I'm going to say everything is relative. We have one Earth. If you look at all the countries, and I've been lucky, I've traveled a lot around the world for work and for pleasure. And if you look around the world, where do you have the best opportunity to survive? That's the way I'm going to put it. And when you come to America, in the United States, you have a much better opportunity to survive. And when you do survive, you have a great opportunity to advance yourself and live your life comfortably. We have the ability to protest. We have the ability to worship in any way you want to, even though some people don't like the way some people worship versus others. And if you look at other countries, they don't have those same rights. So everything's relative. And I'm like Avante, I'd like to live in the United States. It's working out okay for me right now, and it's working out reasonably well for others, but it's not without its problems, right? I don't care which country you go to. It's not without their problem.
Josie, can I weigh in on that real quick?
Yeah, you bet.
Thinking about that in terms of some of the people we've worked alongside of in Honduras, right? And the average day laborer makes $6 a day. So we sit down to have lunch and we eat an $8 sandwich, and we've just burned through a day and a third of a laborer's down their entire wage. There's a discrepancy in the economy, and people will face a tremendous amount when they're hungry, right? I mean, starvation is a powerful motivator. So you'll face racial tension as opposed to starving to death. But that doesn't mean the racial tension is okay. It just means it's less of an evil. So that's what I would add in.
Yeah.
So this is Wayne. Just real quick, here's a statistic. I don't know how old it is, but we make up less than 5% of the world's population, but we consume 75, 74% of the resources. So you can sit down and think about that. And resources is a pretty broad term. It means a lot of things: fuel, oil, gas, food. Anyway, and so if you want to go to a place of abundance relative to the world, this might be where you want to be.
Josie?
Yes.
Yeah, in listening and then in thinking about it, what everybody's saying is, yes, it's like a family. Avante, you got the good, the bad, the ugly, but we're family, right? I think to whom much is given, much is required also. And the American church in particular, that's been one of the things that's been really playing in my head. Where is the church in all of this? And it's kind of hard, because you have to put the mirror up to your face and say, who do you just give the backpacks to the school across town and it makes you feel good? Or do you know the people from across town? Or do you need to know them because, you gave them stuff? The church has a lot to answer for. And where would things be, or how could things be different? I came here as a migrant worker in the early 70s, and it was just prior to that they took that sign off, that famous sign on the Green Bridge, right? Don't let the sun go down on you. And though I was not African American, my parents, because they're from the South and they picked cotton in Oklahoma and Alabama, that's where my parents met, because the joke was that our African American brothers and sisters weren't picking for free anymore. Where are we? What is the church's responsibility in these racial relationships in 2020? And/or where have we been? Yes, America is the land of opportunity. Yes, people want to come here, but just like you said, DeLeon, it's ugly. Why do people really want to be here? Is it because once they make it to the top, they're free from some of those racial discriminations, or they've got enough money to buy, some protection, whatever you want to call it? To whom much is given, much is required. And I really believe the church has been entertaining themselves for way too long and not being in the mix of healing those race relations.
Thank you. We appreciate that.
Josie, can I add a bit to that?
Yes, of course.
As I was sitting here thinking, it's like, I think it's a honest self-reflection to be able to say that we all have the capacity of doing, some things that may not be in the will of God, may be downright, revenge, it could be wrong. It can be evil. And we also have the capacity for good, for sharing, for hope, for healing. And I think if they both exist inside of each individual, and I like to think of the one we feed spiritually, the way we grow together is what we lean closer towards. We look at the United States in that same capacity. We have we have that ability to grow and to heal and to provide economic growth and opportunity. That doesn't mean that everything is good. That doesn't mean that there are not some things we have to prune from our history, from our lives. There's not some things that we have to acknowledge, that we have to ask for forgiveness for. I think knowing that, being able to scale that in, it's some self-reflection that we do in that, but also as a country, acknowledging that, okay, that is a part of us, and how do we heal from that? How do we actually grow from it? I do know one thing, that just turning away from it and not acknowledging it or not addressing it at all, that usually doesn't fill a void that's there. So I think being able to look at it from, even as an individual standpoint, we all have that capacity to sin. Mm-hmm. All have sinned and come short. And we've all done some things that we're not proud of and everything as well. That's not all of who we are. How do we grow from that? How do we heal? How do we prune away those evil parts of us? Because quite frankly, we all have to guard our thoughts and our minds, our spirits. Mm-hmm. So I think sometimes taking it down to an individual standpoint and then looking at, as a country, that exists. And we can't necessarily say, hey, because we have this growth or because folks want this opportunity here, that excludes some dark history and some dark past or some steps that we still have to take to grow and really heal.
Thank you.
Share a story just based on that. When I worked for HP for a number of years, and when my husband and I worked there, they took us through this exercise. It was multicultural training, and everybody had to go through it. And so they put us in a room, and around the room were all these labels. And the labels were male, female, African-American, Latino, Asian, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, all these labels. And so the exercise was, we had to do like a countdown. What was your third most important identifier? What's your second most important? And what's your first? So you're shaking your head. You've seen this before? Yeah. So my third one was female. So I stood under the woman sign third. My second one was Christian. Now this is about 20 years ago. Second one was Christian. My top one was African-American. And as I stood under the African-American sign, I was directly across from the Christian sign. And I look over there, and two of my fellow church members are standing under the Christian sign. They're Black too, and I'm under the African-American sign, they're under the Christian sign, and I'm like, oh no, I'm in the wrong spot. I'm not where I'm supposed to be. And so I talked to him afterwards, and the lady, Peggy, she says, I think I should have been under the Black sign with you. And I was like, I think I should be under the Christian sign with you. And then James was the man there, God rest his soul. He said, we all should be under the Christian sign, because if Christ is our Lord and Savior, he should be our number one focus at all times. And this speaks to what DeLeon was just saying. When people see me, they know I'm a Black woman, but they don't know necessarily that I'm a Christian. I have to work to make them know that. They'll know right away all the other stuff. So that personal discipleship and just letting God lead and change me personally is the most important thing I can do to address any of these issues, because all of that will melt away. All the flaws melt away in his presence. The closer we get to him, the more he refines us. And we just have to be willing to let go. And it's not like I'm losing my Blackness or my womanness. I don't lose it. So just like someone, if you're white and you're being pushed into an area that's uncomfortable, you're not losing who you are. You're becoming more of who God created you to be. And Pastor Brian, I think, is the one I heard say this, that God never calls us deeper into our comfort zone. you know, and so we're going to go into some discomfort, but it's okay. It's okay because we could become more of who God designed us to be. And that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Amante, Josie, but how do we, what I'm struggling too with is the newer postmodern, post-Christian generation, right? Maybe those of us on this panel, that's our sign, right? First, could be said, right? What about those that don't? That's not where they're at because they've been either hurt by the church or just were not raised in the church, but they see the injustice and they feel and they've been hurt by the injustice of racial tensions. That's where I'm struggling with, because the generation that we have now, a lot of them, and even some of the Christian younger kids that have gone to secular liberal colleges, they're questioning a lot of their even foundation. And so how do we continue to have conversations until they come into the fold? If that makes, if I'm expressing myself correctly here, I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah.
I think we love them into it. We got to love them into it. You know, people may not want our Jesus necessarily, but they absolutely want love and they want care. And I find, what is that phrase about, you know, sometimes you're the only Bible that people will read, you know, and so just making sure. And then I think there's another saying, you know, preach the gospel at all times and when necessary, use words.
Yeah.
So let's just love people into it. And I think there's lots of ways we can do that in practical ways. And I think the church in some ways does that. But I always think that, you know, our pastors tell us this all the time, you know, do you know your neighbor? You know, do you know your neighbor? Yeah, you're going across town. You mentioned taking the backpack across town, but do you know the person right next door? Do you know the person across the street? And, you know, that's really been challenging for me to make that time and that effort. And that's just what it's going to take. So if we do it one-on-one, it'll happen in our churches and it'll carry on from there.
Trevor, did you want to add something?
No, I was just nodding and enjoying that. Yeah, I mean, I think there's different layers of expectation. If you say, I am a follower and a disciple of Jesus, there is a different expectation for what we are supposed to believe and how we are supposed to believe it than if we say, I'm just a human. But that doesn't discard also the cry inside of people for justice, regardless of whether they follow Jesus or not. And I think there's an opportunity to say, yeah, you recognize there's injustice here. Let me talk about the God that calls that out.
Delion, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, it reminds me of a young man at the Boys and Girls Club. And as I look over at a mural that he sandblasted, when I first met him, it brought to mind a quote similar to what Avante, you don't want to preach a message as much as you want to live that message. And this young person, because of his hurt and his pain, we spent some time starting there, where he told me about, you know, situations growing up with all 7 siblings, man not being in the household, and going through experiences in school, not really getting on track. This young man was, because I entered in exactly where he was at, that allowed later on for opportunity to discuss what he asked me. I mean, I didn't bring it up, but he asked me about, like, hey man, do you go to church? And this is my beliefs on that. And I think it was, you meet people where they're at times. I think of the come as you are. If I come with pain and hurt, and sometimes you try to tell me, you know, hey, you know, read the Bible, it may be good for me. However, if you show me love, if you listen to me, I'm more likely to hear this Jesus that you're talking about later on down the line. But if I'm, you know, I think about meeting folks where they are at and not trying to change people right off the bat. I listen to Greg Boyer sometimes, and he says, you know, we stay in connection and in kinship with people. And in the midst, we both get healed and we both get saved. and that doesn't come from trying to change or rearrange their life initially. I think especially with our young people, it comes to acknowledging that we're hurt, we're not feeling heard. I'm disgruntled, I'm hungry. I don't know what else to do. I feel like my life, I feel hopeless. And I can give you a Bible verse, but if I walk with you and talk with you and live with you, you're more likely to ask me, what is it that keeps you going? That light in you, what is that? I want to be around that. And I think that's our call to action. And, I can preach to that young man all day, but because he knew that if I ate, he ate, or if we did things together, or if he just needed to vent, or things didn't go well in his life that I had no perspective over. So I had to listen and be present with them. That spoke to love and life. And I want to know what you're doing. What's going on in your life? It'll make way. Your gift will make way for the message, will make way for itself. So I think, especially with our young people or folks that just don't have the same beliefs as us at times, live with them. Be uncomfortable in that situation, but love them regardless, right where they're at. Not if they come to church with us, or if they believe what we believe, or if they know of a higher calling. And I think that's our call. And if we stay there, our young people will feel like, man, you know what? Or people who have different beliefs, they're not expecting me to change. They're seeing the light already in me and God does the work in all of us, So that's just my personal thought on this.
Dealing on what you're saying is relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And relationships are messy.
Mm-hmm.
And those of us that work, in this, world of mentoring and of, hanging out with others that are not our church people, okay, for lack of a better way of saying it, you have to get into their world, and that can be messy. And sometimes, again, it's easier to give the backpack, and it's easier to give the school supplies at the church when they ask for it. But where are the mentors? Where are the people that are engaged in the mess of in the messiness of a relationship, so that then they will listen to the gospel. They say, tell me how much I won't care how much you know until I know how much you care.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy to give the backpack, right? But to get into the messy, like Avante said, do we know our neighbors? Do we spend time? Who are our friends? Just look at our friends. Do we sit in the cafeteria with the same people? Do we sit in the church with the same people? Because it's comfortable. We know each other. We may have a few little quirks that are different, but we know each other. So to begin to really bring together, we got to get in each other's lives, no matter how messy it is, no matter how, because otherwise, how do we empathize? How do we not sympathize, but unless we get in each other's shoes?
Yeah, thank you. All right, I'm going to move us on to, I'm going to try and get 2 more questions in if I can. It looks like we have about 10 minutes left. So the next question is the disadvantage from racism associated more with income or race? Do very poor whites have a similar experience? Avante, I think I'm going to ask you to go first.
I can't compare, if it would be similar or not, but I do think we have racial issues we need to deal with. We got some tensions we got to work through. We also have a lot of poverty related issues. And I don't want those to be lost in this conversation. They're just such unique issues. So if you just start by looking at a problem, regardless of racial or ethnic perspective, poverty is an issue. People who live in poverty are going to struggle for a lot of reasons. Generally, there are educational issues. There are maybe family struggles. There's going to be all these struggles that are happening. And so one of the reasons I believe that we are called to reach out to the poor, and that's spoken of so many times in the Bible, is because of the injustice that happens to people who are vulnerable because they don't have access to what they need in order to make it. And so many people will take advantage of them. And again, because they don't have the capacity to defend themselves, they're just left vulnerable to that. So then you can start to layer on other issues for that. So say if someone's an immigrant, and then say there's a racial tension, and then you start layering on all of these other problems, it just becomes more compounded. So there is a huge issue for us a huge call to us to work through people who are living in poverty. And this is an excellent way to where if you have figured out how to make something work, where you can find someone and then bring them along. And I could give example after example of that. There was a little lady that came to the clinic, to Grace Clinic, and she needed health insurance. She was eligible and we knew it, but the list of paperwork she had to go through to make it happen, she just couldn't do it. So I said, you know what? I'm going over to that office and I'm going to fix it for her. So I go over there thinking I'm going to have it all worked out before I leave, in 10 minutes. When I heard all the stuff they were asking of her, I'm like, I have a master's degree and I can't do this. Okay, so we're going to go find somebody else. So, in that case, what I was able to do is help her find someone who is an expert who could then actually make it happen for her. But people need that access. They need someone to come alongside them. They need someone to help them navigate when they don't have those skills themselves. And eventually you get to the point where you can self-advocate, but that's where it's got to start. Some people just need extra help, and it could be racially, could be poverty, whatever it is. But it's not, we have to get over the idea of thinking they're just not trying, because what happens is that people give up. They do try. A lot of times people do try, but they give up because it's just too hard. Our systems are complicated. They really are. And so anything we can do to help people through that, that's fine. Government might try to fix it later, but we don't have time to wait for that. In the meantime, let's just get in there and see when we can help people move through it.
Mm-hmm. Wayne, you want to take that next?
So I always want to separate income and race. There is an overlap, but the thing with income or class is, and underlying both of those, by the way, is oppression. Mm-hmm. And so with income, people that are poor, so white people that are poor, black people that are poor, there's a comparison or an identity of an oppression for both groups, and they both feel it. With race, it really doesn't matter how much money you got. I think one of the sessions I says, when people go, Wayne, if they know you, how could they this, that, or the other? And I go, well, when I walk out, go to Seattle, put my jeans on, my baseball cap, I'm just another black man on the street, no different than the other ones. So it's not a matter. So this whole class thing, and even when you do get the point where you have more income and you move up and you're with individuals of the higher class, racism follows right along. So really, do very poor whites have a similar experience? They have a similar experience when it comes to poverty and everything that goes with poverty, that black folks have, Hispanic people have, white people have.
Okay, thank you. Ubi?
Yes, they're two different things. I just ran into a mom that I work with, and she says, she happens to be Caucasian, and she says, I'm really hurt because all the colored people are getting help, but I'm not. I'm poor. Right to my face. Like, why should, would it be different if I was black? She said, would it be different if I was brown? Why is the system so stacked to the minorities? I just had to say, that's not my deal. I will serve you no matter, what color you are. Are the systems broken? Can they be better? Absolutely. So sometimes one person, one family, one person at a time, but there are two separate things. Because just like Wayne says, my brothers would walk into Albertsons with their Raider gear, and the security would be walking around with them, basically, because they were Hispanic with Raider gear. So you cannot change your race. You cannot change your race.
Okay. I'm gonna actually move us to the last question, because I really think this would be valuable to just really talk about, how can we actually change things? And I'd love to hear, maybe just think about what you're currently doing right now to help bring about change in your environment. The question started out as what actually needs to change, and how do we do that? And how can we actually change things? So I'd like to maybe just tweak that a little bit and talk about what are you doing in your current situation, in the circles that you're in. What are you doing to affect change? So Wayne, I'm going to ask you to go first.
Okay, it's interesting. A friend of mine that's I was talking to just today, and we were talking about people's perceptions. And I had a great mentor, Dr. Wiley. He was the lab director, and Josie, you know that name. Yeah. He is the one that turned me on to say that I had to do service to my community. And I had never really thought much about it, but he got me hooked up in a lot of ways. And to this day, I still do a lot of community service. And for me personally, there's a couple of things that I do to try to bring about change. One, the fact that I'm on boards, hospital board, state board for all the community colleges. I was on the CDC board. Is I am a Black man, and you need to leave a certain type of impression upon people, so that you can let people know, and they can say, well, yeah, okay. There's at least one person that I know that has. Through that service, my two things I always focus on is healthcare and education. Is I can bring about change that will impact people of color. And with community colleges in our state, 48% of the students that go to community college are students of color. And we just finished doing our strategic plan, which it says leading with racial equity is the vision. It was painful to get that through, but everyone recognized if we can make a change in racial equity, we will have impacts that will affect all people of all colors. And one of the examples I always say is if you look at what happened with race in America and affirmative action, when you look at who got impacted the greatest with affirmative action, is white females. That's who effectively got the greatest impact. And not to say that's wrong, or you're against that, but my point being is when you make policy changes that will help in the area of racial equity, you are going to make changes that cut across all colors and all classes. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. How about you, DeLeon?
So I think of it like I've definitely been researching, having conversations, whether it be at work, working in the social work field. We're revamping our diversity, equity, and inclusion things. But one of the biggest impacts that it's been on me personally, and it still drives me to this day, is my work with young people through Shine, the nonprofit that we work with now. Is I'm still connecting with, some of those same youth that I saw from a freshman at high school, now they're young adults. And whether they have a background of Hispanic, African-American, Caucasian, we're able to connect and break bread together. Not in this time in COVID, but get on telehealth, see how one another is doing, bring hope, talk about issues. I still get plugged into reference lists, and as they're trying to navigate being in poverty and things like that. So we are doing a lot of educating ourselves, researching, connecting, and they continue to inspire me because they are impacted by what's going on, both in socioeconomic status. Many of them are of color, so this hurts from a deeper point. And then also, just seeing the resilience and the inspiration to still want to come together and find change. So to me, that's my greatest growth, is to continue to stay connected to those youth that's involved with Sean, and really just help educate ourselves, help others engage in thoughtful conversation, and continue to serve in the best capacity that we can while social distancing is going on as well. So that's been one of the major things in my life for right now for change, because I think they impact directly. They're raising the next generation right now. So
very good. Ubi, how about you? Go next. What are you doing in your environment to maybe help affect change?
Yeah, I'm with Wayne. Many years ago, I saw the power of getting engaged in boards and getting engaged. My first adventure was being a room mother in the kindergarten classroom and seeing the impact that could be made. My daughter is half white, half Hispanic. And then when I walked into the classroom, they were wondering who I was there for. And I said, my little one. And they're like, oh, we didn't know her mom was Hispanic. So I saw that I need to be seen, right? And not so that I'm seen, but so that I can begin to share and show who I am. Obviously, my color speaks first, right? When I walk into, but then I got involved in PTAs and PTOs and engaged in taking children to, math Olympiads and mock trials, and then got engaged as a booster band president, and then ran for school board, and then ran for city council, and just finished doing Leadership Tri-Cities Class of 25. That's how we begin to get into each other's worlds, right? And get to know each other. And ultimately, we see that we're more alike than we are different. And I continue to hear, oh, you're not like, I don't know, I didn't know what I thought about a real Hispanic was like. Well, I'm a person. It has nothing to do with being Hispanic, right? But that's how I continue to try to give back to my community and to be in the mix of people, to get to know folks get to know me, and ultimately see that I'm just like them.
Very good. Avante?
Yeah, so I agree with service, but since that's been touched on, I'm going to talk about a couple of other things. I think the thing the way I've grown the most through this whole shutdown and all the tensions and everything that's been happening is what I would do is I would have days where I was so disturbed by what I saw or heard or understood. And so I started what I called theme days with the Lord. So I would take a problem to him. I was like, Lord, everybody's talking about justice. What do you teach me about justice? Or I would say, Lord, I hate this world. It's crazy. And so he would talk to me about how to live in this world and not let it completely crush my spirit. So that personal discipleship is so important, personally seeking the Lord. And there's in Romans 12:2 in the Message version, it says, let God transform you by changing the way you think. So I've been allowing God to change my thought patterns throughout this whole process. So that's one thing I would say. The second thing I would say is so important for us to be informed and not just influenced by the media. A few years ago, I felt led to not watch TV news, but instead to find other ways to inform myself. So I've read some really good books over the last few weeks. I sent some things to Trevor, just some books and things that I've read. And there's some really good ones that have helped me to be informed, because just watching the news doesn't mean you know more about what's happening. You know more what they want you to know, but you don't necessarily know what's actually going on. So be informed. And then the third thing, I'm going to talk about a phrase that y'all don't hear very often. I'm going to say Black privilege. And here's the Black privilege. And this is actually, I think it's minority privilege. We live in a majority culture. So we can more easily become comfortable when we're the only one, because we have to do it all the time. You know, when I was in college, I was a freshman in college, they made us read this book called Ropes to Skip and Ropes to Know. I am not suggesting you read it. I'm just saying we had to read it. And there was one part I remembered because I went to a historically Black college. And so what they told us in that book were things like, when you go to work in corporate America, you're not going to go sit with all the other Black people at lunchtime. You're going to go sit with your other coworkers. You're going to mix it up. And so from the very beginning, they were forcing us to become comfortable being in a setting where it's just us and then everybody else. And so get comfortable with being uncomfortable. You know, put yourself into a different situation. Just explore different things. I created this YouTube playlist with all this different kind of music on it because I think Christian music is too separated. So I created one, and it's got, you know, contemporary Christian, it's got urban gospel, there's Korean soul, there's even a Gaither video. I added a Gaither gospel video to it, you know? And so just worshiping with my brothers and sisters, the ones with tattoos who are rapping and the ones who are standing around harmonizing beautifully. And I'm learning to really appreciate that. So those are some of the things I'm doing personally, and just find ways to engage with people. I think that's probably the best thing we can do right now.
Good, thank you. So for myself, I'm going to give a plug to certainly my parents. My dad always taught us that we should give back to our community, right? Your community gives to you, you give back to your community. And if you see injustice, be willing to stand up and say something about it. Don't ignore it, right? I will tell you, this time in our society right now is just terrified me. And I'm very uncomfortable with a lot of the racial tensions that are happening. I'm terrified about what's happening health-wise in our world. And so, you know, one of the things that you do, again, to help bring about a calm is to learn, is to educate yourself. Learn as much as you can about the things that you're fearful of, that you're afraid of, right? And so, you know, I've tried to do that. I've tried to put myself into situations that I'm uncomfortable with. I will tell you, when I first was talking with Brian about, you know, I felt like we needed to do something. We had a conversation about that. Inside my gut, I just had a very uneasiness about it. But I thought, you know, I've got to be willing to step out, and you know, I'm doing that at work as well. I've been very uncomfortable with some of the conversations that we're having, and part of it is just my own fears. And so, how do I overcome those fears? And part of it is it's about getting myself educated, really looking into some of the research that's being conducted, the studies that are happening right now. And so I certainly want to encourage everyone, if you have questions about, again, racial tensions, you know, I would encourage you to look at some of the research that's been conducted. One of the sources I use quite frequently in my work is the Pew Research Institute. Right, I've done a lot of work in studying their surveys on generations. You know, because we have 5 generations in the workplace right now, and so as a human resource manager, I'm trying to help our managers, you know, manage all of those different generations, and they all come with their unique experiences and richness, right? And how do we help them really help those you know, come together to be able to work together successfully, and everybody bring their uniqueness. And so certainly, you know, I want to encourage everybody to educate themselves. I want to thank you all so much for the time that you have taken out of your evenings on Wednesday to come and join in these conversations. I appreciate, you know, I appreciate that so much. And I know that, you know, you have a desire to know more. And so, again, I want to encourage you to continue that knowledge. I think that, you know, while this series might end, think about, what will I do next, right? So one of the things that I want to do is I actually want to be a part of a book club. There's a lot of great books out there that are opportunities to study, you know, different areas. And so really interested in connecting with a group that allows you to be able to talk about that openly without feeling judged, right? This is really an opportunity for us to develop that understanding and to be able to do it with honesty and integrity and humility. I think is just so important if we're going to make change in this world. And I want to work on changing me. There was something I heard last night as I was watching Oprah last night when it was on the John Lewis program that they had, and she said something about progress over perfection, right? And it's not about being perfect, but it is about making progress. And so, what can each of us do to make progress to help create a better and greater understanding of our brothers and sisters around us? So thank you again, Trevor and Brian. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to help facilitate this session. And I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Josie. And I'll reiterate exactly what you said. And thank you to all the panelists and all the people the last 5 weeks who've stepped out and helped with this conversation. And thank you to people who sent in questions and voiced things. And obviously we started off saying, these are difficult conversations, but we need to have them. And I appreciate all of you for taking part in that. Incidentally, so both Avante and De Leon had responded to requests for resources or information. I went ahead and put that into a PDF and uploaded it to OneDrive and put a link in the Facebook feed. So if you're interested in downloading that, please feel free to do so. Share that link. There's just some books, some suggestions, a link to the YouTube playlist Avante was talking about, and then some of the books that De Leon had suggested for him. So there is that opportunity. Well, next week, we're going to take a turn and shift gears, and we're going to come back to COVID because, that's a cheery subject too. And we're going to hear from Dr. Joe and kind of get a COVID update and where things are at. And then after that, we have kind of a fun thing that'll, I think, be interesting and a little less controversial, hopefully. So that'll be announced in the week ahead. That said, thank you all so much for tuning in, for taking part in this. And I do pray that you continue these conversations. Wayne, Josie, De Leon, I and Brian, as well as others, will be continuing to talk about how do we continue to carry this stuff forward. So we'll let you know, what those opportunities are. Between now and then, thank you. Thanks for tuning in. And Brian, would you like to close us in prayer and send us out?
I'd love to. Thank you all for being a part of this. It's just been a blessing for all of us. Lord, I thank you for the beauty and diversity of creation. I thank you for the kingdom that we all yearn for. Help us, as you told us to pray for your kingdom to be felt here on earth as it is in heaven. Lord, help us to work for it. In your son's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. God bless. Have a great night. Thank you all.